And here we are. It is Tuesday night, and the topic of tonight's shir is the tale of Bilam and the orphans, the tale that has stumped so many rabbis throughout the ages. The shir is generously sponsored by one of our listeners in the Northeast in New York. L'kavod his birthday. We wish him a wonderful year ahead and beyond. Much parnasa b'harchava and gesund and nachas and simcha, and just a happy, healthy year. Simcha, nachas, and bracha in all areas. So why are we talking about Iyov? It's Parshas Lech Lecha, right? This is the parsha of Avraham Avinu. This week, next week, Chayesar as well. These are Avraham Avinu's parshas. How does Iyov get into it? Well, Avraham Avinu had a father. His father's famous Terach. And the Arizal reveals to us in a number of places, written by Reb Chaim Vital, but in the Shar HaPsukim, in Iyov, there's a nice piece about this, and elsewhere, where the Arizal teaches us that Terach's soul came back to this world. Terach was an avid idol worshipper. He was Nimrod's trusted advisor and a chief priest. He was the Groise Galach. He was the chief priest of Nimrod. And the Arizal says that even though Terach did do teshuvah, right? Rashi says this week, and by the Bris Ben Absorim, Hashem told Avraham that your father will do teshuvah. But the Arizal says that Terach had fallen so low in Avodah Zarah, he had become so contaminated and so defiled that the tshuva that he did was just the beginning of his road to correction. His soul had to come back again. And his soul came back as Iyov. And who suffered more than Iyov? And Iyov's suffering was a correction for Terach's soul. And this is something that after the Arizal was Megala, I mean, it's everywhere. The Rameh Mifano brings it, and the Chidah, and there's so many people, everyone's talking about it. Reb Heschel, even the Reb Heschel, the great Rebbe Reb Heschel of Krakow, who we don't have much from him, B'Ksav. We have the Sefer Chanukas HaTorah, Vertlach of his on Tanakh, very sharp ideas that were recorded, many by his students. And in the past, I once said that his students compiled the book, and I received not hate mail, but some dislike mail, that the students did not compile the book. It was only compiled generations later. Okay? Granted, okay, so it's compiled generations later, but ideas were recorded by his Talmidim. And the book we have today, Chanukah Sater, not a very big book, wonderful, wonderful, it's very cute and sharp, and it dazzles with brilliance. And he has a piece on Parshas Lech Lecha this week. And he's actually dealing with a Medrash Rabbah. The Medrash Rabbah says in the end of next week, in the end of Vayera, that after the Akedah, after the Akedah, Avraham was afraid. Avraham was afraid of Yesudin. Nisiyara Avraham Avinu min ha-Yesudin. Avraham Avinu was afraid of suffering. And Hashem told Avraham, don't worry, there is somebody already who will accept all the suffering on your behalf. And his name is Iyov. That's what it says in Medrash Rabbah, in Vayera. Avraham was afraid of suffering, and Hashem said, don't worry, there's someone else who's going to take it all on your behalf. His name is Iyov. And the Medrash finds this because after the Akedah, it speaks about Avraham's, his mishpacha, from his brother Nachor's side, and there's someone there called Utz. And it says about Iyov, the book of Iyov begins, he lived in the land of Utz. So that Utz links to two, that Avraham was told by Hashem about Utz, about Iyov. It was a comfort, that don't worry, don't be afraid you'll suffer, you won't. There's already someone who's going to take your place. And the question is, what does that mean? Like if Avraham was afraid of suffering, why was he afraid? And if he was, what was How could Iyov take his place? So Reb Heschel has a sharp piece. There's a whole dreidel in a Gemara in Masechta Brachos, but he does mention that Avraham was afraid he would suffer for his father. Avraham was afraid he will have to suffer due to his father's sins. And Hashem told him, don't worry. You don't have to suffer for your father. Your father's coming back himself. Your father's going to come back in the guise of Iyov. He had the soul of Terach. The souls came from the same place. And that suffering is going to cleanse the soul of your father. You don't have to suffer on your father's behalf. That's how Reb Heschel explains that medrash. Avraham was afraid because he might have to burden the consequences of his father's actions. And Avraham was comforted. The Eibishter says, no, don't worry. Iyov's going to suffer on your behalf because Iyov himself is your father. So, wow. So Iyov is the incarnation of Terach. And that's why he suffered so much. Jump into number 4. I have to share this. This is from the Chidah in the Midbar Kedemos. He's quoting the Alshich. Actually, this whole piece is just a quote from the Alshich. But here we get both the Alshich and we get the Chidah quoting him. And I didn't have a copy of the Alshich either. Anyhow. Okay, who is Iyov? When and where did he live? So it's well known the Gemara in Baba Basra has a few amudim dedicated to Iyov, and there is brought many opinions. There's quite a range of options of when he lived. A famous opinion is that he lived during the times of Yaakov, and he married Dinah. So that he married Dinah. And the Arizal actually says that Dinah was an incarnation of Avram's mother, Amasloi, Bas Karnavoi. Terach and his wife both came back. He came back as Iyov, and she came back as Dinah, and they got married. And if you want to hear more about that, come to the Shabbos afternoon shir after Mincha, and we will delve into this particular reincarnation saga in depth with the Eibishter's help. But that's one famous opinion. It's also brought in Medrash Rabbah that he was Poshet, he married Dinah. He was in the times of Yaakov. Rava says in the Gemara he was in the times of the Meraglim. Like Rashi brings in Chumash that Moshe told the Meraglim, go check if Iyov's still alive. Right? He's protecting them. Others believe Iyov was alive when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash. You're talking years, 1,000 years later. Others say he was alive during the times of Achashverosh, right after Nebuchadnezzar. There's an opinion, two opinions. Two Amoraim believe he was alive in the beginning of Bayis Sheni. That's when he lived. And most believe he was Jewish, by the way. The Gemara says, Mefurish and Baba Basra, that most believe he was Jewish. Only a couple opinions say he wasn't. Most believe he was Jewish. When he lived, you see take your pick from the days of the Avos to the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash, which would mean it's one of the last Sforim written in Tanakh, right? Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, right? Malachi passes away 40 years into the second Beis HaMikdash in the year 3448. So if Iyov was alive there, I mean, the Sefer would have had to have been written there in order to be canonized by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. Anyhow, so the story, the book of Iyov begins, so there's a man called Iyov and he feared Hashem, he was a great guy, and the Eibishter was sitting in his Bezdin in heaven, and the Satan shows up, and God asks the Satan, where have you been? And the Satan says, I've been searching out the whole world. The Satan Bechlal was extremely impressed by Avraham Avinu. As the Gemara says a few times, and we'll see something absolutely amazing, fascinating in a moment. But the Satan was, he marveled at Avraham Avinu. So Hashem tells him, and about Iyov, the Zox to garnish. You say nothing about Iyov. So the Satan says, Eibishter, Iyov is a good person. He was. Ben Adam Lamokim, Ben Adam Lachav is a great man. It's because you've given him everything. He has a beautiful family. He has all the money in the world. It says he was the richest person in the East, the Psukim say. So he's very wealthy. He has everything a man could want. So he's thankful. Shkoyach. He owes it to you. Well, you think he's going to be a Russia? He's a normal guy, so he shows his gratitude by being a good person. Like, why should he rebel? Why would he rebel? Test him. Take away everything he has and see what's going to happen. So the Eibush allows the Satan to test him. So originally Iyov loses everything as far as his possessions and his family. He lost his entire family except his wife. All of his kids, every single one of them died, boys, girls, 10 of them altogether, and every penny he had, he lost. But he still didn't lose his faith. So then the Satan tells Hashem, that's because you haven't hurt his body yet. He hasn't suffered physical suffering. No, his mind can still, I don't know, he could still make the proper decisions, he can still act wisely. But if he suffers, if his body goes through Yesudim, then all bets are off. So the Eibush tells the Satan, all right, have a shot. So Iyov then suffers unimaginable Yesudim in his body. And that's when things start to get a little out of control. And Iyov is comforted by a few of his friends. 3 of his friends come. There's Eliphaz and a few others. A few other of them come. 2 others. Then at the end, the 4th guy comes, Elihu. And they have a long philosophical discussion with Iyov. They speak and he speaks, and it goes on for many prakim. So it's very long, and it's hard to decipher the exact meaning of the words. And that's why there's many Mefarshim discuss exactly what is going on, what is Iyov saying. His friends rebuke him. Iyov complains. His friends rebuke him and tell him, maybe you're not the great tzaddik that you think you are. Maybe you deserve these things, etc. The Gemara says in Bab Metzia, there's something called oinoas dvorim, to harass somebody with words, right? And the Gemara says, for example, what Iyov's friends did to him. The Gemara says Iyov's friends came to comfort him and they end up lambasting him, chastising, rebuking him and telling him, don't complain, maybe you deserve this. Shkoyach. That's not called comfort. That's called oinah. And they traveled far. They traveled, the Gemara says, a huge amount of, a colossal distance to comfort him, and they had good intentions and they were great people. But the Gemara says ultimately the words they said to Iyov were damaging. Iyov just wasn't able to accept what they were saying, and it was counterproductive. The Gemara says, oinoas dvorim, verbal harassment, to tell somebody that. Wow. So, after Iyov's 3 friends finished talking, a 4th guy shows up, Elihu, or he was there, but he was quiet, Elihu. And if you look in number 4, the Chidah in the Midbar Kedemus quotes to Alshich, that it says, Vayicher af Elihu ben Barachel, Elihu was angry, from the Mishpach of Avraham. He was angry be'Iyov chora apoy, al tzad koi nafsho melikim. Elihu was upset at Iyov because Iyov was tzad koin, is what the pasuk says. He justified his nefesh more than God. Iyov felt he was in the right and the Eibush is in the wrong. He didn't deserve to suffer this way. His chatoim, whatever sins, don't mount up. In fact, Iyov said, Eibush, if you would have a scale and measure my sins on one side and the suffering on the other side, it ain't gonna be even. What's Iyov saying? I'm suffering much more than I deserve. He was saying, even if you despise us for what we've done, but the anger is just too much. Iyov said, all right, maybe I've done some things wrong, but Eibishter, you have unloaded on me. There's no rhyme and reason. And Elihu was chora apoy when he heard Iyov's self-righteousness. The pasuk continues, ubeshloishes reyav, and then against Iyov's 3 friends, chora apoy, Elihu was angry. Al asher loy motzu maina, because after Iyov responded to what his 3 friends told him, right? Iyov had the issues Iyov was really pushing that it's not fair what's happening to me. And in the end, his friends didn't have what to respond. Vayarshiu es Iyov. So how do you read this? There's a few ways of reading the words Vayarshiu es Iyov. They didn't respond. They didn't have a response. But Vayarshiu es Iyov. So let's read it simply. They just said Iyov was wrong. So Elihu is angry at both Iyov and his friends. He's upset at Iyov for Iyov saying that he was right, and he's angry at Iyov's friends for them saying Iyov was wrong. So that doesn't make any sense, right? Ki l'chayre Yipala, the Alshich asks, Elihu tofis chavola b'trei reshi. Elihu is holding the rope from both ends, or mazakish Torah lebeitra is using the same document for both people for both litigants. Mimanashich im gimel re'ei Iyov divreim lo. If Iyov's friends were out of line and their words were incorrect, she was upset at them. Imken Iyov is a tzaddik, so tell Iyov, good on you, you said it's right. The im Iyov ain't a tzaddik, if Iyov is wrong, and that's why Elihu is like, Iyov, stop, how could you claim such self-right? It's not true. So then Yafa Amarev, and the friends are right. So how could Elihu be upset at both? Like, so Pirish HaRav, the Alshich says like this: Iyov Atzma was a tzaddik. V'chol asher haya omer mitzidkasu ma'asav atov makolemis. Everything Iyov describes about his righteousness and his good actions, all true. He was a Yirei Elokim, he feared God. V'sar me'ra, he stayed away from bad. Omnam do'aka, here's the issue. Iyov was perfect, but Iyov's life is only another chapter in a bigger book. There's an earlier chapter when Iyov's soul was terach. Ki nafshe asher b'kirba, his soul is terach. V'soivel Yisrun is suffering to mechaper what terach did. So now you understand. V'zer she'omer. Elihu was upset at Iyov because why? Be'Iyov chora apoy al tzadkoi nafshoi. Iyov didn't say my current life has been sinless. Iyov said, my soul is pure. Wrong. Ki ha'af umnam gufay tor, your body of Iyov is pure. But nafshoy begilgul shel avar chata, but your soul in the previous life did sin. So how could Iyov be mitzadik his soul? It's not true, Iyov, your soul is tainted from the past. But the three friends, he was angry at them too, Elihu, why? Because the three friends were Marshia Iyov, meaning they said, Iyov, in this life you're a Rasha. That's not true. That's why they were both wrong. The im came the words of Elihu nechmodim izav ad kan tivir harav marein harav Moshe Alshich. They were both wrong. Iyov said, my soul is pure. It's not true. The soul is tainted from the last lifetime. In this life you're pure. That's true. And that's why when your friends criticized you for your activities in this life, they were out of line.
Elihu was a Yid?
Yes. That's what the Gemara says. It says, Mishpach Hashem, Elihu was Jewish, yeah. And the others, the Gemara in Baba Basra discusses the others. Fine. Wow. Okay, so you see, knowing this idea that Iyov was a Gilgul of Terach really sheds light on quite a few things. Okay, join me in number one. The Gemara in Baba Basra compares and contrasts Iyov to Avraham, which also would seem random, but once you have this Arizal, you understand. Iyov is Terach. We compare and contrast Avraham with his father. Terach, the original Rasha, but then he turned around and did Tshuva. There's almost like this competitive between Terach and his son. Look at number one. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Gadol hanemer be'Iyov yosim ma'ashenemer b'Avraham. What's said by Iyov is greater than what's said by Avraham. You heard that? What it says by Iyov is greater than what it says by Avraham. The ilu ba'Avraham, Ksiv Hashem says, now I know you're a God-fearing man. But by Iyov it says, Ish, Tam, he was sincere. V'yasher, he was upright, just. Yirei Elokim, v'sar merat. Four descriptions. Avraham just gets Yirei Elokim. But what does v'sar meira mean? Amar Abba Bar Shmuel, Iyov v'atzon b'mamoinoi haya. Iyov was a veteran in his money. Minhagish aleilam, the custom of the world is noisen chatzi pruta lechenvini, but Iyov was mavater mishalei. Means, like Rashi says like this: imagine you have a guy do a 30-second job for you. So the amount you pay him is actually worth less than a pruta. So you tell the guy, here, come to the store. I owe you half a pruta, but they don't make such a coin. So I'll take you to the store. I'll buy an item, a product worth a pruta, and I'll give you half for me, half for you. Right? A carton of eggs and 12 eggs then was a pruta, 6 for you, 6 for me. But Iyov would give him all 12. Iyov never did that. People would do that. Iyov always gave the whole thing. He always paid more. Iyov vitra mishaloi. Now Rashi says it could be dafka on small change like that, but still, Iyov was a veteran. Iyov was, he would just give, which is interesting because the great Ur Sameach, wrote a commentary on Chumash, the Meshech Chochma, and I think he was even more proud of his book, the Meshech Chochma, that he wrote on Chumash and the Megillus than the Ur Sameach on the Rambam. He also has Chidushim on Gemara, Chidushim of Reb Meir Simcha, and a great Gaon, 100 years ago, in Dvinsk, alongside the Rogatchover, and the Meshech Chochma, he says, note the language of the Gemara. It doesn't say Iyov was greater than Avraham. But Gadol Hanemar, what was said by Iyov is greater than Avraham. Do you know what that means? He says, by Avraham, his fear of Hashem was so powerful, that itself led him to do all the right things. By Iyov, it wasn't like that. Iyov feared God. But his fear of God wasn't enough to automatically cause him to do all the right things. It was a separate decision. Besides fearing God, he also chose to be an Ishtam. He chose to be a Yosher. Right? Each of these things were a separate decision that he made. But Avraham was so permeated by his fear of God that Avraham had all these qualities, but they were all just automatic derivations from his fear of Hashem. A very interesting insight from the Ur Sameach. And the Ur Sameach also says, you know what the difference of Avraham and Iyov was? Avraham made fences, always made safeguards. Iyov never made any safeguards. It was, if it's the thing's okay to do, then it's okay to do. The Pasuk says he would allow his kids to party as much as they liked, and after the party he would bring karbonos in case his kids sinned. He never told them maybe you shouldn't party that much. You know, the safeguards. So that's another theory that the Meshech Chochma has in Parshas Bo. He has that distinction that Iyov was not a man of safeguards. But it's interesting because the Gemara says that he did go beyond the law when it came to monetary matters. He did go beyond the law. It's like when you think of someone who has no safeguard, it's like, oh, what I have to do, I do it. I don't have to do it, there's nothing extra. Like there's no lifnim mishur sadin. But you see, Iyov did have that. When it came ben Adam lachavera, he did go beyond the letter of the law. He did go beyond the letter of the law. So that's interesting to point out. Number 2, the Gemara says, Bris karati le'enai. Iyov said, Eibishter, I took upon myself, I made a covenant with my eyes. I won't look at any maidens, any strange women. So Rava said, Afro lepumi de Iyov, dust into the mouth of Iyov, because Iyov wouldn't look at other women, but he would look at his own wife. Avraham didn't even look at his own wife. That's this week's parsha. As Avraham told Sarah when he sees her on the way to Mitzrayim, oh, and I know you're dati, now I know you're beautiful. It's mashma that Mikara originally he didn't know. Which by the way is he didn't know that she was beautiful. The Marsha asks, you're saying he never looked at her? How could Avraham have married Sarah without looking at her? The Gemara says in Kiddushin, it's also to look at a woman without looking at her first. Because you might marry her, you might send a shliach to betroth her without you seeing her, or you betroth her yourself under the chuppah, you never saw her before, and then afterwards you look and you find something unbecoming, and you could despise her in your heart. The God says, "V'ahavta l'recha," you have to love your friend like yourself. How much more so your wife? So the Marsha says, so how could Avraham just have never seen Sarah? You have to see her at least before you get married. So some say the issue is only if you don't look at her before, if you don't gaze at her before, and you do after, you may see something you don't like. But if you never plan on looking at her, if you never plan on looking at her, there's no reason to look at her before. Right, it's like Rav Yaakov Maza says, my wife comes home and she says she would like to go out, I let her go. The Marsha himself answers that Avraham did observe her before they married, but many years had passed when he was busy with his spiritual pursuits. He hadn't really taken notice of her for many years, and he assumed that by now, Avram's 75, she's 65, he assumed that she aged, and with her age, her beauty had aged too. And Punkt, he got a look at her, and he realized she's as beautiful as ever, and that's why Avram was taken aback. That's the Marsha's own answer. Anyhow, but what do you see from this Gemara again? You see there's a rivalry between Iyov and Avram. There's a rivalry between Iyov and Avram. And then you take to number 3. Omar Rab Levi. This is also in Baba Basra. Satan u'Pnina l'shem shamayim niskavnu. The Satan and Penina was the wife of Elkanah. She was a co-wife together with Chana, Shmuel's mother, and she would harass Chana, oppress her. So Rab Levi says both the Satan and Penina have good intentions. What was the Satan's intention with having Iyov suffer so much? Like, what was the Satan's business that Iyov should just suffer? For what reason? Well, that's really what the book of Iyov is about. What is the reason for suffering? That's really what the whole question is. Why Taka? In other words, why Taka did Iyov suffer? That's really what the book's all about. Says the Gemara, Kivan de Chazia. Rab Levi says, this is unbelievable. When the Satan saw that the Eibishter was really, he had a soft spot for Iyov. The Notya Daite, the Eibishter's mind was in favor after Iyov. And the Satan's like, but what about Avraham? The Satan loved Avraham. Amar Chas v'shom minshi leila chamunusei d'Avraham. Maybe God will forget about the compassion of Avraham. So the Satan's stirred up his whole accusation against Iyov just in order to bolster the position of Avraham as the prime tzaddik, the true tzaddik. And then Penina harassed Chana, but we know that she harassed her co-wife Bavur Harim in order that Chana should be so broken, distressed, oppressed that she would daven to Hashem with a broken heart, like Shitaka did. Va'eshbech es nafshi lifnei Hashem, right? And Shitaka finally was zeichet to have a kid. So Penina wanted to bring out that deep, deep prayer from Chana's heart. Dorsha Rav Acher Bar Yankiv. So Rav Acher Bar Yankiv in the city Papunya gave this drosh about the Satan. You know what happened? The Satan himself came and he said, Yashikayach, Nashke Lekare. He kissed the feet of this Rav Acher Bar Yankiv. The Satan Bechlal can come in the guise of a human body, of a person. We have numerous stories of the Satan. Malachim, sure. 3 Malachim by Avraham, Gabriel. You have stories. Malachim, the Satan himself, can come in the guise of a person. Hollywood ran wild with that. Satan come in the guise of a person, but there is such a thing. But here, look at this. The Satan came and Nashke Lekare, kissed his feet. Could you imagine? It's like the Arizal once in Sfas, he went to the Beis Medrash of the Alshich, and the Alshich was giving a drasha in Parshas Vayetze. And he was speaking all about Lavan, and the Arizal sat through the drasha. And the Arizal said after that, Lavan himself came to hear the drasha, and he was busy nodding at everything the Alshich said. So similar over here, the Satan Pasha came, heard the drasha, and gave a kiss to the feet of Acher Bar Yankiv, because it's a great justification. The Satan Pashut was marshalling the cause of Avraham Avinu.
That's good for us. As Yidden, I'm saying. Iyov is not one of the others. He's one of the others.
Well, it says, had Iyov not questioned God, we would say every day, Shema Nesra like Avraham, like Yitzchak, like Yankiv, like Iyov. He's up there, man. The man is up there. So again, there's this rivalry, mamish, between the Satan. You look at these Gemaras, you have Avraham Avinu and Iyov. Even this is the argument of the Satan and God. The Eibishter wants Iyov, the Satan is taking the side of Avraham Avinu. You have Rava saying the difference if they looked at their own wife. Rabbi Yochanan saying about who. But once the Arizal tells us that Iyov has the soul of Terach, it makes a lot more sense. That, it's Avraham and his father. His father, the great Rasha, then did Shuvah. Avraham himself, right, the Rambam himself in the beginning of his life, he also worshipped like everybody else, but then he broke away. So Avraham was also somewhat the Geder of a Baal Shuvah, but not to the same dargah as Terach. So there is one more thing I need to share, which is beautiful. It's a vart of the Vilna Gaon. What's the vart of the Vilna Gaon? Rava, by the way, Rava is pretty critical about Iyov. Throughout the Gemara in Baba Basra, there's quite a few statements critical of Iyov, and even some of them are not said by Rava, but the commentaries say, no, it's meant to have Rava's name. Rava's meant to be the name by each of these critical comments about Iyov. And one of them, Rava says that Bikish wanted lahafoiches akaira alpia. He wanted to turn the bowl over. Rashi says that in Iyov's discussion with his friends, Iyov blasphemes. He says the Eibush is not fair, he's not right. He doesn't act justfully. He promises if you're good, you'll get a good life. And it's not what's happening to me. Something's gone wrong. The Eibush is not keeping his word. And there's many details of why that might be. Does he know everything? Does he not care? Has he handed over my life to some other force besides his own? All types of svaras. So that's what Rashi says. He was chidif v'gidif, very sharp, very sharp. And that's what Rava means, that Pashat Iyov was turning the Cairo on his head. The Vilna Gaon says there's an old story, a very old story. Okay, you ready for this? There was a king who had a good friend, who was his attendant. And one day the attendant comes, a bowl of delicious, I wouldn't say stew, because they don't serve stew in the palace. Some delicious minestrone soup. Something royal. So what's a good royal soup? I don't know. What do they serve by chasnas? Oh no, it has to be has to be double colored, right? The half green pea and half butternut squash. I tell them it's the butternut squash. Butternut squash, So, as it's bringing the soup to the king, a little bit drips the king's garment. This king does not tolerate that. The king's face turns red. And this attendant knew that's it. He's going to he might get killed over this. So the attendant then takes the pot and pours the whole thing on top of the king. Now the king's for sure going to kill him. But before he does, the king says, Mazeh, like, could you explain what you did? So the attendant says yes. The first drop fell, it was an accident, but I saw that you were not going to tolerate it. You were going to, I would suffer horrible consequences. But around the kingdom, people know I'm a faithful attendant, right? They're going to hear a little drop fell or something that, and they're going to think that the punishment you give me is not, doesn't correspond to the crime. And people will question you, people will, I didn't want you to have such a reputation throughout the kingdom. So I wanted to deserve the punishment you would give me. So I poured the whole soup on you. So now when you kill me, everyone's like, yeah, the guy deserved it. I did it for you. So the king was so happy, he embraced him and he abolished the death sentence. So that's the old story. So the Vilna Gaon says, this is what happened by Iyov. Iyov throughout it was a great man. Okay, so maybe he had some small infractions here or there, but the Eibush that punishes him is colossal, right? It's not, doesn't correspond to the crime. So Iyov said, Eibush, this is going to give you a bad rap. It's Pashat Chilul Hashem. So I'm going to say some things, some awful blasphemy towards heaven. So now when I suffer, people say, Iyov deserves it. The guy's a shvans. The guy's a heretic. The guy deserves it. That's what the Vilna Gaon said. It brings to mind the Gemara in the end of Sanhedrin. It says here that David wanted to serve idols because David was being pursued by his son Avshalom. And David said, what? People think I'm a righteous king. And if my son kills me, what will the Jewish world say? How did the Eibishter allow a righteous king to be murdered by his wayward and wicked son? So David said, quickly, I want to serve Avodah Zarah. So when I died through my son's hand, people will say, he deserved it. He wanted to do a crime to justify the Eibishter. It's a pasuk we say in Kriyish Malamit, L'chol avadcha chatosim, v'hara beinecha, I did evil in your eyes, l'man titztak bedovrecha, tizka b'shaftecha. One of the interpretations is that the sin was done in order now, the judgment is fair. As it's a very scary thing. Like we need to justify the Eibishter. What the Eibishter is doing now is unfair. But it gives him a bad rap. We have to make it fair. So let me, sin a little more. It's like the Goyim said, if Yoshka died for our Averis, we may as well do him. For sure it is. For sure it is. Anyhow, but this is what the Vilna Gaon said about Iyov. Of course, every Lubavitch kid knows the story of Iyov. As in Masechta Sotah, he was one of Paro's 3 advisors. Iyov was one of the 3 advisors. And when Paro said we had the Jewish problem, Vazal Mentan, so Bilam said, let's destroy them, and Iyov was quiet. And Iyov ultimately was punished with his suffering because of that instance. And that's what the Gemara says, not because of a Gilgul of terror. The Gemara says it's because of his silence then. Now, in Sefer Iyov, there's a pasuk where Iyov says, on this Yecharad Libi, my heart will tremble. There was something that caused Iyov's heart to tremble. And the Medrash Rabbis says, it was when Nadav and Avihu died. When Nadav and Avihu died, Iyov heard about it. And that caused his heart to tremble. So everyone asks, why was Iyov shaken more than anybody else based on the catastrophe of Nadav and Avihu? So the Chidah in his Nachal Kedum, I think it's there, it says beautiful. What was the sin of Nadav and Avihu? Many, right? Throughout Midrashim and the Gemara, you'll find a whole stack of Averos, which usually means we don't really know which one. Like each one is, as you throw them, it's unclear, it's really ambiguous, it's hard to understand. But the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that in Daf Nun Beis, one day Moshe and Aaron were walking, behind them Nadav and Avihu, and Nadav tells Avihu, when will these 2 elders, our father Aaron and Uncle Moshe, when will they pass away? And we're going to lead the Jews. We're going to lead the Yidden. That was a very inappropriate comment. So they both died. But Iyov thinks, why'd they both die? Who said the comment? Nadav said to Avihu. In the Sifra, on Parashat Shmini, or Achrei, wherever it is over there, it says Nadav and Avihu both said. But in the Gemara Sanhedrin it says Nadav told Avihu. So Iyov thinks, why did Avihu die? Avihu was silent. You know what that means? If you hear something that requires for you to protest and to say something back, and you don't, you can't just say, oh, well, I was quiet, what's the big deal? No, you're held accountable. And that's why Iyov began to shake, because he realized years ago when I stood before Paro and Bilam said, kill the Jews, I was silent. And for years I thought, no, Hashem can't, what fadibul can Eibush to have with me? I was silent. No. If you're silent when you should have spoken up, you're held accountable. And that's what that's why he shook. There's a Briska Vort, a Vort in the Briska dynasty, that says, why, because of Iyov's silence, was he punished with suffering? Iyov was silent because he thought, if I speak, it won't help. So that nicht help, and Paro's already made up his mind with Bilam. My advice is not going to help. My protestation won't make a difference. So why should I speak? There's no point to speak if it won't help. So the Eibishter gave Iyov awful suffering. You know what happens when you suffer? You scream. You bang your toe, you yell. Why? It's going to help? No. When something hurts, you scream. You don't make cheshbonos. When something is out of order, you make noise.
Did Rabbis say this? When he was screaming about
By the Chafetz Chaim, yeah. A few times the Rebbe says Tutvei Shreitman, yeah. The Rebbe said it's a Tutvei Shreitman. When it hurts, you scream. So the Rebbe, there's a word in the Brisker dining. That's why Iyov was punished with Yisurim. Well, do you think that if the speech can't help, you keep silent? Let's see what happens by Yisurim. No, so when it hurts, you scream. Anyhow, so with this introduction all about Iyov, we come to number 5. The Gemara says in Baba Basra, Rava says, it says about Iyov, Birchas Oived Alai Tavai. The blessing of Oived is the one who's lost will come upon me. And the heart of the widow I will cause to rejoice. Basically, I'll help the orphans and I'll bring joy to the heart of the widow. What does it mean, the bracha of the Oived Alai Tavai? Malamed teaches me. He would steal the field of orphans. Umashbicha, he would improve the field. Umachzilan, he would return it to them. A father passed away, leaving his children real estate. The kids are young, they cannot develop the land, so the land will, who knows, could deteriorate, be left unused. So Iyov would possess the land and he would work mashbiach. He would seriously improve the land, and when the assignment would come, boom, look what they found, beautiful, right? It's like you have a dilapidated garden, you leave and you come back 6 months later and there's beautiful. It's a botanical gardens. There's flowers and fruit trees and a swimming pool and beautiful. And who did it? Iyov. V'leiv almona arnin, he rejoiced the heart of the widow, that whenever he found a widow that had issues with shidduchim, he would throw his name upon her. He'd say, oh, I know this woman, she's related to me. All of a sudden, he associated himself with her, and Botamal, she became the most eligible woman on the market. V'hava also not that come and marry her. So this Iyov was not just a man of the law. Iyov went well beyond. I mean, the Meshech Chochmah says that when it comes maybe to prohibitions, he didn't add safeguards. That's what the Meshech Chochmah tain is. But I think it's undeniable that when it came to the positive, at least Ben Adam Lachaveroi, he went well beyond. He was a good man. The shaila is, how was he allowed to go into the field of an orphan? He had great intentions. Is that allowed? Are you allowed to repossess, steal somebody's property if you have good intentions? Look in number 6, it's a Gemara in Bab Metzia. The Gemara in Bab Metzia is Samachala from Medvet. Okay, so now we leave the Medrash part of the Shir, and we're going into the Halacha part of the Shir. This is actually, this is supposed to be a legal monetary discussion. Look what happens over here. There's a pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim, Loi Tignoivu. Loi Tignoivu means do not steal. But the Gemara says, stealing, theft, I know is prohibited. From the fact that the Eibishter prohibited taking ribis, you can't take ribis because you're unlawfully taking hold of somebody's possessions. So for sure you can't steal. Or from Oino, you can't defraud somebody in prices. Right? So for sure to actually go into their home and take something that's not yours. So Loi tignoivu de kasav rachman Allah. These words in Parshas Kedoshim, why are they there? What do they teach? Look at the time. There's a brayser. Loi tignoivu, amanosla make it. You can't steal, even if the purpose is just to harass the other guy. Loi tignoivu, even almanos l'shalom tashlumei kefil, even in order to pay kefil. Meaning, if you're goinev from somebody and 2 witnesses see it and they testify against you in Bezdin, you got to pay double. You pay back the item you took or the worth of it, plus the 100% you plus the value of the item. The logic is, the Rambam says that ultimately what you wanted to do to your friend will be done to you. You wanted him to be at a loss of $100, you'll be at a loss of $100. You give back the 100 you took plus 100 of your own. It's like Adam Zebman. What goes around comes around. What you wanted to do to your friend will occur and will happen to you. Fine. So the Brisa says you can't steal even in order to pay kefil. Rashi explains, you have a friend, you want to help him. He doesn't want to take any tzedakah. He will nicht nehmen kein tzedakah. There's a guy, he needs help, but if you offer him tzedakah, you offer him, hey, here's some money. He's not going to take it. So you found a clean way to help him. You steal from him. You'll be charged in court. You'll pay double. So he'll lawfully get the money you wanted to give him. That's how Rashi explains. You can't do it. Even though you have wonderful intentions. You want to give him money in a way that he's not ashamed. Just can't do it. So if you can't do that, so what was Iyov doing going into the property of these orphans? He had good intentions. It's like stealing in order to pay back more. Can't do it. That's the Shaila. Who asked the Shaila? In number 7, we have here the Maharam Shif, the great Maharam Shif, who lives in Germany in the early 1600s. He passed away around the age of 36. Right, so he wasn't all that old, but he had ksavim besides for Gemara, but also in Kabbalah. He was a very, very great man, and Nebuch died young. As I'm going through my 30s, every birthday I think about who I've outlived historically, who came to this age, and what did they leave? What did they accomplish? And where am I in this world? And it's usually it's not very uplifting and encouraging. We think about all those people that just didn't waste any time, and they accomplished, they achieved, turned over worlds. The Maharam Shif says about himself that he had a verstopte Kopf, he had a hard time learning, very difficult time. But he toiled and toiled and toiled. And in fact, he said, the Gemara says in Yuma that if someone goes a mile, they'll ask you, why didn't you learn? You'll say, I had too much money, too many possessions, too many distractions. I had 100 businesses, and I had 50 properties, and I had 10 private airplanes. I had too many things going on. They're going to say, were you any wealthier than Rebbe Elazar ben Chisma? Were you any wealthier than other people that were very wealthy and they managed to learn? And if you say, I had no money, and I had parnasa issues on my mind constantly, they'll say, were you any poorer than Hillel? So Hillel will be Machayev the poor, and Yosef will be Machayev those that, the playboys. Oh, I was too busy running after my types. The Maharam Shif said, I'm Machayev the tipshim. You're going to go a mile and say, I couldn't learn, my head was just stuffed, I couldn't think for the life of me. They're going to say, was your head any more clogged than the Maharam Shif? No, and he managed to learn. Anyhow, so the Maharam Shif writes in his Chidushim on Bob Mitzvah, in number 7, this that they ask on what we say in Baba Basra with Iyov and the orphans, that he was benched by them for stealing their field, it's Taka Kasha with the Braisa Bob Mitzvah, Echtev Shomim Yitzhashem. When we get to Baba Basra, I will write the answer there. Unfortunately, we don't have it. We don't have it. We have his Chedushim of Baba Mitzvah, but on Baba Basra, there might be a drop, but not on. Or it got burnt. There was episodes of Shreifa as well, of many things. Okay, so we got to go back. Before the Maharam Shif, who asked the Shaila? It's asked by the Me'idi in number 8. Rav Menachem Me'iri is one of the Rishonim, one of the later Rishonim. He's around the year 1250. He passes away, I think it was 1316, around there. And he lives in Provence, southeast France, Perpignan. If we go Mir Hashem on that trip in the summer, and we go through Spain and Provence, then we'll definitely go visit Perpignan. And the Me'idi was there. And he writes in number 8, Yesh Averis Shehem Nasois L'chavonis Mitzvah. There are some Averis that are done with a good intention. But it doesn't make it allowed. Not everything, it's all about what's in your mind, it's all about your intention. It's not. It's true, Rachmana Liba Boy, the Eibusha desires the heart. But a good intention doesn't justify everything. So he says, therefore, what was Iyov's, what did he rely on? We praise either he stole karka v'aniyim v'yisoimim, and he improved and he gave it back. How's he? You're not. It's a great intention, yeah, but the action is forbidden. You're not allowed to. So Yeroy, it seems to me like this. Shaloroiv hisparsem ma'alosai. Iyov was so famous, and his virtues were so well known. Even though he didn't verbalize, he didn't tell the orphans, this is what I'm doing. But everyone knew Mimidos, everyone knew he wasn't trying to steal. The orphans also knew he wasn't stealing. They knew, so they were Michael, they allowed it, they were in on it. They knew it looked like he's repossessing their land. They knew what he's doing, because Iyov always did these things. No one suspected him, so the orphans were in on the story. They were for sure Michael, they were happy. But the Gemara says the word Geisel. She says, even though Afalpi that he didn't say it, everyone knew that it wasn't for Kavonik Zela. And it doesn't say the word Geisel, Ela outside Harachav Lefi Daiti. I believe, says the Meiri, the word Geisel in the Gemara, number 5, was just to dramatize the story. It wasn't really Gzela. Everyone knew that he wasn't stealing, he was helping the Yisraelim. They knew it too. But it looks like, you could paint the story, to dramatize the story, you can have a headline, right? Iyov steals the field, right? If it was going to be in CNN News, they would say, Rabbi steals the field of the orphans. That's how CNN and all the anti-Semites would...
But that ruins the next statement of the Gemara. So everybody knows what he's saying about the Almanis, and it doesn't help anything.
Still, the very fact you said... No, Iyov was so... By the Almanis, could be people knew they weren't related, but the very fact that he even said the woman's name was already that's how choshev he was. How the Gemara says as well, Iyov was so holy. Kol hanoitel pruta me'Iyov misbrach. Anyone that would get a pruta from his hand would be benched by that pruta, which they would say about the Rebbe giving out dollars. Kol hanoitel pruta me'Iyov misbarach. He get benched. Because the pasuk says Iyov was benched in everything he did. So that's the Meiri. Okay? The issue is, the pasuk says, the blessing of the lost one will come upon me. Iyov said, the blessing of the Oved. You know what Rashi says in the Gemara? You don't see it on the sheet. You know why you don't see it on the sheet? Because it's not there. I didn't put it on the sheet. But Rashi says... Well, I'd rather have a Baba Basra. But Rashi says the Oved is the orphan. The orphan thought he was losing his field. Birchas Oved Alai Tova means the blessing of the person who thought he was losing his field, in the end would come my way. It sounds like these saying we're not in on it. It sounds clearly, according to Rashi, they weren't in on it. So it doesn't fit with Rashi. The Marsha learns different than Rashi. The Marsha learns Birchas Oved means an orphan naturally loses possessions. He doesn't know what he owns, where he owns, what to do with it. So an orphan is called the loser, the one that loses. So Oved doesn't mean that the orphan was worried he was going to lose this particular field because Iyov was in it. But Bechlal, an orphan can be nicknamed an Oved. That's how. So the Meiri learns like the Marsha. You could say the orphans were still in on this these activities of Iyov. Okay, that's the Meiri. If you look at it doesn't work with Rashi. If you look at number 9, even earlier than the Meiri, the Rameh, Rabbi Meir Halevi Abulafia in Toledo. He's in the times of the Rambam. He's younger, but he led a shtickle crusade against the Rambam, and we've spoken about that in the past. But the Rameh, so he has the Yod Rama. I think we quoted him last week as well in the vegetarianism. Says the Yad Rameh in Baba Basra. Last week we quoted him in Sanhedrin. Here we have him in Baba Basra. Look what he says. Rava was Dairish. What does it mean? Birchas Oved Alai Tova. He would steal the field of the orphans, mashpich, improve it, and give it back to them. Says the Yad Rameh, Veheni mili b'umas ha'elam. This only works by goyim. A goy can do this. But for a yid to do this, it's not a milah. Because the Gemara says in Perek Ezu Huneshech, which we saw in number 6, you can't steal even on having in mind to pay Dalad Vehei, which doesn't say in our Gemara, but that idea, even you take a lamb or a goat, and a shur or a sen, you shechter, you sell, you pay 4 or 5. What's the Yad Rameh saying? Iyov was a guy. Iyov was a guy, and therefore Iyov was not only allowed to do it, he's prey to Mal Yusa. For a Yid, also. So what's considered praise for a guy, for a yid, is not even permissible. But for a guy, it's a wonderful thing. So you're saying Iyov was a guy? Does Rav is the one who said this whole word, the story about the orphans. What is Rav else? Look at number 10. Number 10 is the Gemara in Baba Basra. Rav Taka said Iyov was in the May of Meraglim. Rav says Iyov was in the days of the Meraglim. How does he know? Because it says here by Iyov, Ish hoya be'eretz Utz. Iyov begins. There was a man in Utz. His name was Iyov. And it says by the Meraglim, Moshe told the spies to find out Hayesh bo eitz. Is there a tree? Are there trees in the land? Eitz and Utz are the same thing. So it's funny, often the Gemara just accepts these things. Here the Gemara says, no. Eitz is not Utz. Mi dami, how can you compare? Hacha Utz, hasam Eitz. Utz and Eitz aren't the same word. So the Gemara says, no. What Rava meant was, Moshe told the Jews, there's a certain person living in Eretz Canaan. He tells the Meraglim. His years are as long as a tree. The Gemara says he lived for 210 years. Iyov lived a very long time. And he protects the generation like a tree gives off shade and protects those around it. When Moshe said, are there trees in Israel? He didn't mean Hayesh ba'etz. Go see, count how many trees. Of course there are. Remember what's that? He meant, is there a tzaddik who's like a tree? Which tzaddik did he mean? Iyov. The Utz Eitz was just a way to remember. That was just a simon. But the point is, Rava believes Iyov lived in Eretz Canaan while the Jews were in the desert. So according to Rava, Iyov was Nishken Yid. So Taka, Rava l'shitasai. In fact, there's a Tosfos, I didn't manage to get it on the paper, Tosfos quotes from the Ri that many opinions hold Iyov was a Jew. Rav is one of the opinions, one of the very few, that believes he was not a Jew. Okay, so that's the Yad Rameh. Okay, so that's the answer. He's not bound by the Gemara number 6. Loi tignova was said in Pashas Kedoshim to the Jews. A goy taka can't steal. It's one of the Zayin mitzvahs of a goy. But stealing in order to improve something, not only to pay back, but to improve it, that wasn't said to a goy. Finished.
We would have a Sefer Chavdal Tzvarim that's from a goy. That's interesting, right?
The Gemara brings an opinion that Moshe was the one that wrote the book of Iyov. Moshe wrote the book of Iyov. Moshe wrote the book. He was a Navi. The Gemara says Iyov was a prophet. He was. Abisha spoke to him in the end of Iyov. The last part of the Abisha's, after Iyov's friends, after their whole Fabreng, and the Abisha pokes his head and starts talking. Iyov was a prophet, as were his friends. He was a good man. He was Tam, he was Yosha, Yerei, Elikim, Sori Meira, and was sagst du, Agoy, was came von dem ablehnen. Look at number 11. This is Rab Matisyo Strashon, the son of the Rashash. So you have the Rashash of Shmuel Strashon, who printed in Vilna, and he was a Rav and a Grois Alamden, and etc., etc. And he had a son, Rab Matisyo Strashon, who was famous for his library. He had a world-class library that he spent years and years just building up and collecting. And he was a great, so look what he says over here. He quotes the Teres Chaim, but he says, everybody asks from the Perik Ezu Neshech, it says, Loi tignoivu amanos l'sham t'shlume kefil. You can't steal even in order to pay back more. Iyov just does just that, and he's praised for it. V'ro'isi, so says Reb Matasyor, number 11, the 4th line. I saw that Rameh who writes that Heni merely by a goy, but by Yisrael kahai gavni is not mal yusuf, because we say in Ezo Neshech, Yutaka can't do this. But Velinir says Rav Matasyor Strashon, I believe, She'ulai nochem lahagia hayonoitul, he took the field of the orphans. Don't have the word geisel. The word says geisel, right? In number 5, which is the Gemara that we're dealing with, the story of the orphans, it says geisel. Right, and the Meiri had an issue with the word geisel. So he says, just to dramatize the story. Rabbi Maziyad says, you don't have to retouch geisel. Just get rid of it. Just take out the word. You don't have to be bothered by it. The word noitel should be there. And noitel would mean, just like the Meiri, that the Yisayim were taka in on it, was brishus. The problem is, but then you have the shaila of Oyved. Rashi says Oyved means that the orphan thought he's losing his field. I thought he's in on it. So he says, you'll learn like the Marshal, like I mentioned. The Yosem happens to lose everything because he's just not, doesn't know what he owns, where he owns. So he's just, he can be described as someone who will just, his properties may fall through his fingers. But he could be in on the loop on this specific property, in on it and being moichel and allowing and desiring that Iyov improve the property. Like the Meiri, but it's even better. There's no Shveda Vord Geisel, it's Neitel. Right. So I want to explore a couple more options. And here we go. You ready? First, in number 12 is the Shita Mekubetzes. The Shita Mekubetzes by the Betzalel Ashkenazi, who was in Egypt, and he was a student of the Radvaz in the mid-1500s, early to mid-1500s. He overlapped time with the Arizal. They say the Arizal worked on some of the Shita Mekubetzes with the Betzalel Ashkenazi. But either way, says the Shita Mekubetzes on the Gemara number 6 in Bab Metzia about the Isser to pay back even more than you took. Al Menos Lamekat, Yesh Meforshim, some say, listen to this. The Meiri we're talking, Shuhu Einoi Roitza La'akiv Hagneva B'yodai. Some say we're talking that you don't want to keep the Gneva B'yodai. You don't plan on keeping it. Meaning you're going to give it right back. So why'd you take it? Goyniv Kedei L'tzaroi. You take it to annoy him, but you don't plan on keeping it. So imagine, I don't know, you left a watch, you have a watch on the table, so I take it, And even though I plan on giving it back, and I just took it to annoy you, that's part of the Isser. It's Osur D'Oraisa. Says the Shita Mekubetz, says V'loi Nira, can't be. D'maisim b'chol yoim she'oisim kach. Maisim b'chol yoim. People do that all the time. I took this from you. If someone left a watch on the table, a bacher leaves a watch on the table, so another bacher goes and grabs it for a minute. He's over an issur d'oraisa, even though he's planning to give it right back. He's just doing it to tease the guy. Can't be. Can't sein. Lekach, therefore, yesh mefarshim, some say, devadai, you're only over bedaitoi la'akiv hagneva b'yodai. You're only over if you want to hold on to the item. You don't plan on giving it back. It's not amanos lahachzir. It's to keep. So then what's the chiddush? So it's tam gnei. Why do you have to... Loi tignoiv was coming to add this case. Because eina goynev b'shvil shum hana. Because you're not stealing for benefit. You're only stealing to annoy the guy. The Gemara shaila was stealing, theft, gneva could be learned from the laws of Rabbis and defrauding someone financially, selling someone for... Yeah, but those cases... You're hurting because you want the guy's money. You want it. This case, you don't want the object. You took it. You're going to hold on to it just to spite the guy. This is trying to under Isser. This is amanos l'meika, just in order to harass. Avdem kumt lo tignovu. But if you're planning to give it back, you're not over. So according to this, we have a simple answer off the bat. That the halacha that you're not, the Gemara says, when it says in number 6, you can't steal amanos l'meika, it means to hold on to an item, to harass, you're not giving it back. But the Gemara says, the Braita says in number 6, you can't steal even in order to pay back kefil. It back plus double. I think you're going to have to translate that to mean you stole an item from a person, you will not give back that item. You'll pay kefil. You stole l'chveis, a watch from the guy. It's a geschmack, it's a rare watch. It's worth $10,000. You're going to pay back $20,000, but the watch itself you're not giving back. You'll claim it's gone or something, so you'll have to pay the worth plus double. You will. The market value of the watch plus, double kefil. So you'll pay back $20,000, but you'll keep the watch. You'll have to translate it that way. But if you're giving back the item itself, it's b'chlal not asur. If you don't want to hold on to the item for good, you're not over. So if you learn that way, so simple. Iyov went into the field. His plan was, I'm just here for a bit. I'm giving it back. You're b'chal not over. Finished. End of story. That's answer number one. For I'm going to give you a collection of 4 answers, all as far as dinim ominous and the dinim of theft are concerned. That's answer number one. Yeah, one.
But the Lashon of Gezel is a little bit.
We're
Gezel is a little bit more like.
going to get to the difference of Gezel and Gneva.
Like out in your face.
Right. So, okay. So answer number one is that Pasha doesn't apply if you plan to give it back. Do you know what the issue with this answer is? Almost nobody holds of this vort in the Shittum Mekubetzes. I saw somewhere they bring it from the name of Rabbeinu Tam. It doesn't seem like anyone really holds of it, because the Brisa does say it's also even to pay back kefil. To say that's talking about when you're going to hold on to the item and just pay the worth plus the worth of it again, double. Whereas if you would give the item itself back, it's okay, it's strange. If you're going to give the item itself back is okay. But if you're not, you're going to pay double, then it's asur d'oraisa. You'll have to make that distinction. It's a little bit doichik. And the Rambam clearly says, the Rambam writes, it's asur to steal even almanos lahachzir. Even almanos to give back. You don't believe me? Turn the page. And you hear ding, turn the page. Look at number 13. Says the Rambam in the laws of Gneva, also ligna of culture, it's also to be going of anything, din Torah. I mean, they're stealing a shava pruta, and that's the real issue. And if you steal, you have to pay back. But if you steal even less than a shava pruta, it's still asur din Torah. And there's a whole discussion why it's asur. You would say, well, it's like any chatzi shir, anything less than the amount. That's what the Maggid Mishnah says. But the Gemara says in Sanhedrin that less than a pruta people don't care about. People are moichel, people don't care. So it shouldn't be asur min haTorah. That's a discussion for itself. But continues the Rambam, va'asur lignov deres choik, genev is asur if you're doing it as a joke, or lignov al manos lahachzir, you can't be goinev al manos lahachzir. The lahachzir is not in the Gemara. In fact, the Shittum Mekubetzes brings the shitta that lahachzir is dafke mutter. The Rambam says no. You're giving back the item, it's all in the same boat. It's all the same kettle of fish. Lignev al manos l'shalem. Hakol asur, it's all asur. But then the Rambam gives a reason. Shelo yargel atzma bekach, you shouldn't become accustomed to it.
It's actually asur, it's just that
so it sounds from the one Rambam's words, Shelo yargel atzma bekach. It sounds like that it's only a safeguard. Shelo yagel atzma sound like it's only a set. We'll get there in a second. But you see from the Rambam, it's asur al manos lahachzir. The Tur, the Shulchan Aruch, all paskin like the Rambam. So the Shittum Mekubetzes we saw on the other page is definitely not standard opinion. Standard opinion is it's asur, even al manos lahachzir, the very item. So Iyov is still up the creek. Iyov still needs a without a paddle. He needs a justification. So here's the thing. So the second possibility is the Rambam says lahachzir is asur, even if you're giving back the item itself, right? Or in order to pay, but the Rambam gives a reason. It's asur in order you shouldn't be margel atzma bekach. Why is it giving a reason? The Gemara said that this was pshat in loy tignoivu, right? The Brisa said, you know why it says loy tignoivu? It's extra words. It's to teach you these cases. Why is the Rambam giving a reason? It sounds like it's chachomim asur, so you shouldn't become accustomed to these acts of theft, because where is it going to lead you? You don't write such words on a Torah dika isur. If the Torah asks, because it's theft thing, you tell me why the Eibishter asked it? So if you look at number 14, this is the Alter Rebbe in Hilchas Gneva and Gzela. Says the Alter Rebbe number 14, Va'afilu, if someone steals in order to return the very chayfetz atzmai, or amanos lamekut, he wants to harass him for some time, but then give it back. Even if the kavon is not to pay him, it's just a joke. Hariza oiver beloy sasa. which is very strict, because that means, Taka, that if you take someone's item just to tease him, it's pasha to over a loisasa. Simple reading. Even if it's derech schoik, even if you plan to give it back, but maybe if the person knows you're giving it back in a minute, it's not really a problem. It could be that means you did it as a joke. You did it to pay back, but maybe that guy doesn't know for sure he's getting it back. Right? The Alter Rebbe is not getting into the mind of the one that was stolen from. He's only speaking about the mind of the thief. But then he says, V'yesh oim, some say, Einoi asur ela medivrei soifrim. All of these things are rabbinic. Shelo yargil asma, you shouldn't become accustomed. Who's he quoting? The Rambam doesn't clearly say it's Rabbanon. The Rambam just says it's asur because you shouldn't become accustomed. The Lechem Mishnah, right, one of the main commentaries on the Rambam, the Lechem Mishnah says the Rambam must hold this to Rabbanon because of the reason that he gives this to rabbinic. The Alter Rebbe wrote has a little kuntras achron, a very small kuntras achron. It's not on the paper, where the Alter Rebbe says he's not so convinced. Just because the Rambam gives a reason, it could still be d'oraisa. And the Rambam is doirish time dekra, right? Rabbi Shimon holds you're allowed to be doirish time dekra. If the Eibusha gives a mitzvah, you're allowed to try and figure out the reason of the mitzvah, and then, based on the reason, have halachic ramifications.
And they would still be deraisa ramifications.
You would define, you know exactly where to apply the biblical din based on the reason. Right, like the Torah says, you can't take a collateral from a widow who owes you money. So Rabbi Shimon says, you know what the reason is? Because if the widow is poor, and you're going to take clothes from her, so you take him. You'll have to keep on giving them back to her whenever she needs it. Right? When it comes to a mashkin, you'll take it. You're going to be going back and forth to her apartment every day, every morning, or every night. And people are going to see, people are going to start talking, and rumors start to spread. Oh, look who's hanging out. So Shimon said that's the reason. So it doesn't apply by a wealthy almana. That's it. That's called dorish time of dekra, to try and figure out the reason of why the Eibusha gave him mitzvah, and then see where and when it doesn't apply. So the Alter Rebbe just says the Rambam could hold this doiraisa, and the Rambam is saying, why did the Eibusha ask her all these things? They're not inherently theft. The Eibusha doesn't want a person to become accustomed to these actions. So the Alter Rebbe is not so convinced that the Lechem Mishnah is right, but nonetheless he does quote in the Pnim that Yesh Oim is only the Rabbanon. The Lechem Mishnah in the Rambam, and there are some others as well. It's not the only, but it's one of the main ones. So this would be though another answer. If it's only the Rabbanon, when did the Chachamim answer these things? The Alter Rebbe writes famously that most Isurim D'Rabbanon was the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash. I mean, everyone knows, right? Ezra and Beis Dinoi, the Anshe Knesset Agdel and Ezra Beis Dinoi, they were masakin, or almost all the D'Rabbanons that we have. There is the Mabit, the famous Mabit, the friend of Rabbi Yosef Kaira, where they sat together in a bezin in Tzfas. The Mabit says during the 40 years in the desert, there were no D'Rabbanons. Moshe was masakin to read from the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu's takana to read from. But when was he masakin that? Before the 40 years were up, there was no full sefer Torah. There was no kosher sefer Torah. It could be he was masakin before he passed away. That when there's a full sefer Torah, you should start reading. The Ma'abit says there were no shavusim, there were no rabbinic prohibitions. At least there were no rabbinic prohibitions during the 40 years of the desert. They started later. And some, we don't. How would you ever know? It's hard enough to examine dinim and figure out what's d'oraisa, what's d'Rabbanon, but then to historically locate when that d'Rabbanon came into effect is almost impossible, if not impossible itself. But let's say taka all of these dinim of theft, you can't steal it for a joke, to return, to pay back more, etc., etc. If it only came at the beginning of Bayesheni, like most Rabbanons, so most opinions with Iyov was earlier. It wasn't Asher then. It was not Deraisa. It's not Deraisa. It's only Rabban. It wasn't Asher. It wasn't Asher. Great. The issue will be with the two Amoraim that believe that Iyov was in the times of Ezra. He came back from Babel with everybody else. So he would have, and he lived for a very long time. So he would have been alive during this Isser. So that won't work with them. More than that, it could very well be that this particular Issa D'Rabbanan started well before the days of Ezra. Shlomo HaMelech was Masakin Erevin. It's funny, they always quote Shlomo as being Masakin Erevin. But an Erev only works in domains that are also D'Rabbanan to carry. It doesn't work in Rosh Hashanah. But which Rabbanan answered it? Which Rabbanan? Shlomo was Mati. Which Chachamim answered? It was him. It was him. He created the Rishuyas D'Rabbanan, and then he said, "There's a way to navigate through that." Anyhow, so the Isurim of carrying on Shabbos with Erevin, was Shlomo at the beginning of the first Beis Hamikdash. So, we don't know exactly when this Isur D'Rabbanan would apply, would have come into effect. The other issue with this answer is that, first of all, the Alter Rebbe is not sure that Rambam actually holds this way. More than that, the Brisa, the Gemara in Bab Metzia quoted the Brisa to explain why Lo Tignova was necessary in Pshat. Why did the Eibishter write Lo Tignova? And the answer is for these Yisurim. How could you say it's only to Rabbanon? Then what's the pasuk for? The Gemara asked, what's the pasuk for? And it said, this is what it's for. To say these are only to Rabbanon, very difficult. Very difficult to say that. So, we continue to search. So answer number 3. Okay, answer number 3 is like this. Okay, look at number 15 is the Kovetz Shiurim Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. The great Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. Rosh Yeshiva, before the war, was killed in 1941. He was a student of big Rosh Yeshivas himself, of Rabbi Shimon Shkop, Rabbi Chaim Brisker, the Chafetz Chaim, and then he was a legendary Rosh Yeshiva. He fahered my Zayda. All of a sudden, my Zayda was young, right before the Holocaust. Came to his yeshiva, gave a shir klali, and then he fahered some of the Talmidim. Fahered my Zayda. Anyhow, I think it was in Belgium. I think it was the Heidi Yeshiva it was called. Anyhow, in the end of the 1930s it was. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman says in number 15, Baha de Iyov haya goizel sada yisayimim. This that Iyov stole the fields in order to improve it. Makshin, everybody asks, right? This is everybody's asking this shaila. It says loy signav, and we learn that amanos shalom kefil. Good intentions, like the Miri says, don't justify the ends, do not always justify the means. The Yeshloi Marha, it's Rava who said it. According to him, Iyov was not a Jew. The Imkain, it could be that Bnei Noach lo nistavu alze. He says like the Yad Rameh, Bnei Noach, and he says Rava l'shitase. Bnei Noach weren't commanded because the pasuk was said only by Yidden. The oidig is second answer. Yeshloi Mar, there's a toisis in Baba Kama Daf Yiralef brings from the Yerushalmi. There's something called Ein Shomin Leganav Legazlan. When it comes to a mazik, someone that damages, Yankel has a pit, right? So and the barrels, the animal falls in the pit and dies or gets injured. So let's say it died. So the animal was reduced from a worth of $1,000 to $200. So Yankel owes $800. So Yankel can tell Beryl that you take the carcass, which is worth $200, and I'll pay you $800. A mazik can do that, but not a ganav or a gazlan. If you steal somebody's animal, right, and it dies in your domain, you can't say, here's the dead animal, I'll pay you the rest. You keep the dead animal. You either buy him a new animal or give him the full amount in cash. It's called Ein Shamin Leganav or Legazlan. And the Yerushalmi says that we need 2 psukim, 1 for each. The Loyav, we don't learn Ganav from Gazlan. In other words, there's 2 things. There's Gneva, there's Gazela. They're not the same thing. A Ganav is a thief. One who steals clandestinely, quietly, without you knowing. A Gazlan is a robber, one who comes up to you. Pashut is a chamson. He takes it from you. He looks you in the eye, you look at him, he looks at you, he says, thank you very much, and he takes it and he goes. That's a gazlan. A gazlan is a robber. They have different dinim. A gazlan never pays kefil, only a ganav. A ganav is worse than the gazlan, the Gemara says famously, because if the ganav does it quietly, it means he's scared of people. But what about God? The gazlan says, I don't care, I know God's watching me, but I don't care if people see me. The gazlan says, I don't care if I'm being watched. The ganav is afraid of being watched, which means he denies the fact that Abish is watching him. The ganav versus the gazlan. And they've a number of similar dinim, obviously, but there's a number of different dinim. The Yerushalmi believes you need a special source both for the ganav and the gazlan as far as ein shaman, that you can't work out the worth of the dead animal and you pay the difference. We don't learn one from the other. So says B'chanan Vasserman, look back in number 6, the Gemara in Bab Metzia says, Loi tignoivu. In fact, the Gemara before then asks, there's a pasuk in Kedoshim that says Loi sigzal, you can't be geisel. And the Gemara asks as well, who needs Loi sigzal? You should learn robbery from taking interest, ribis, and from ainoah, defrauding. And the Gemara says, yeah, Loi sigzal was talking about holding back a worker's payment. That's Loi sigzal. So Gemara, we have this lav of b'shnei lav, and the Gemara talks about that. So then the Gemara asks, why Loi tignoivu? Oh, that's for this. You can't be going of almanos to pay back more. Says B'chanan Vasserman, it was only said by Loi tignoivu. It could be dafka b'gneva, we learn from the pasuk. Avo b'gzeila leka kra. There's no pasuk b'gzeila, and you can't derive one from the other. Going into someone's field is often at hate. It's open, right? Everyone knows that's gzeila. You can't be a ganav by karka. It's a gazlan. Gzeila. This din doesn't apply by gzeila. Fascinating. Reb Shloime Gansfried in the Pnei Shloime wants to say the same thing. It doesn't apply by gzeila, only by gneva. It's taka doiraisa, not like the Lechem Mishnah and the Rambam. It's taka doiraisa. By gneva, nish by gzeila. By gzeila maybe it doesn't apply at all, or it applies to Rabbanon. We have the same answer that Iyov lived before the Rabbanon came. Or the truth is, if you say it's the Rabbanon, you could always say that B'shvil Yisoimim, the Chachamim would have allowed it. Once it's the Rabbanon, you could say, B'makam Yisoimim lo gozru. You could say something like that. Or the Netziv says, I think if it's the Rabbanon, you could say that it's only an issue if the person is paying, but if the person doesn't know about it, like orphans don't know what they do and what they don't own, so then it's not such a... Once it's the Rabbanon, it's very easy to get out of it. Bechal might not be the Rabbanon at all. It was only said by Gneva. So this is a major chiddush. The Bach says it before them. Before the B'chanan and Reb Shloime Gansfried, the Bach says it as well. The Bach says the din was said by Gneva, not by Gzeil. You know why? Because the Rambam says, what's the reason? You shouldn't become accustomed. Gzeil is a rare occurrence. Take something when you know about it. Gneva is when people steal without the knowledge. By Gneva, there's a concern of continuation. Not by Gzeila, the reason doesn't apply. That's what the Bach says. So now the truth is, you could mamish stick this in the Rambam. You know why? Because the Rambam has two sets of halachas. One is Gneva, one is Gzeila va'aveda. In the laws of Gneva, the Rambam says in number 13, this din you can't steal in order to pay back. In the laws of Gzeila, he doesn't bring it. In the laws of Gzeila, the Rambam does not bring this din at all, that you can't steal to pay back or pay back more. Doesn't quote it. Right, that would be the reason. Because there's not Shayach Hergo. The issue is that the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch don't make this distinction. Both the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch bring the same din by Gneva and by Gzeila. It happens to be the lashon of the Tur by both of them. It's asur to steal amanos l'shalem. He doesn't say the word kefil, just asur to steal in order to pay. And the Shulchan Aruch adds the word to pay back even better. But they both write the same thing by both Gneva and Gzeila. In Tur and Shulchan Aruch, the halachas are also separate. There's Gneva and there's Gzeila. But by both of them is the same thing. The Shulchan Aruch says asur to do it in order to pay back kefil, to pay back more. By Gzeila is no kefil, but to pay back more. The Tur in both accounts just said it's asur almanos l'shalem. But the Beis Yosef understands it to mean even to pay back more. The point is, they don't make a distinction between Gneva and Gzeila. Oh, the Rambam Taka does. The Rambam seems to. So if you go with the Rambam, then you could say this argument of Rabbi Chanan Wasserman and the Pnei Shlomo. Now, what would be the logic, though? Why Taka would Geneva be different from Gzela? So there's a beautiful Minchas Chinuch in number 16. In number 16, the Minchas Chinuch. What's the deal with Geneva and Gzela from a Goy? This needs a shear on its own right, but Rashi in Masechta Sanhedrin Daf Nun Zayin says it's not awesome in our Torah to steal from a Goy. There's only an issue of Chilul Hashem. The Rabbanon Chilul Hashem. The Rambam holds it's all asur by a Goy. Geneva and Gzela asur by a Goy. The Maharshal, famously, one of the famous comments of the Maharshal in the Yam Shel Shlomo, the Maharshal says the Torah was given to Jews. It's 2 Jews, 4 Jews. Why would the issue of Lo Sigzol, Lo Signova, why would these things apply from a Yid to a Goy? So the Maharshal is choylek on the Rambam. The Maharshal says he doesn't believe that these psukim refer to the interaction of a Jew with a Goy. It's a Yid to a Yid, not a Yid to a Goy. The Chacham Tzvi has a tshuva, famous tshuva. Says, I don't know what the Maharshal's talking about. The Torah was given to Jews, not to Goyim. But what's the problem with there being a mitzvah to a Jew, and part of the mitzvah is how you deal with a Goy? The Torah is talking to the Yid, but just like there's mitzvahs to a Yid, how you deal with a plant. Yeah, you have mitzvahs of how you deal with a plant and the earth. Why can't there be a mitzvah of how you deal with a Goy? Doesn't Chacham Tzvi says, I don't understand what the Maharshal is saying. Yeah, that's a whole shir on its own. But the Minchas Chinuch, look what he says in number 16. The Geneva and the Gzela of a Goy, the Rishonim talk about the Achronim. I'm not going to be Meirich. But let me tell you something. Even those that think the Gzela of a Goy is rabbinic, but the Geneva of a Goy is awesome in Torah. You hear? There's a difference of Goyner from a Goy or Goizel. Goizel could be, even if Goizel is rabbinic, Goyner will be deraisa. And he throws in, just like Almanos Lamekat, the Rambam holds is by Geneva, not by Gzela. There's a difference. You can't even steal your own thing. Let's leave that. It's also Lignav min HaTorah. He says, what's the logic? He says like this. He says, when it comes to Geneva, it's the act itself the Eibishter despises. When it comes to Gzela, I just took it from your hand. You knew about it. I didn't deceive you. By Gzela, it's the fact I should have your money. It's not mine. By Gzela, it's about the loss I cause you. By the Geneva, it's the act that I do. Since by Geneva, it's the act that I do, Mizeh Nira, the Torah didn't ask Geneva just because of the money, but it's a midah gerua ba'atzma. The whole enterprise, the whole activity of Geneva, the Torah despises it. That's why it's asur even to pay and pay back more, right? Even if you say that's d'oraisa, because it's all part of the act of Geneva. And that's why by a Goy as well, Hashem will answer it, he doesn't want you to do it. The action itself is abhorrent and deplorable. Aber Gzela, im kein bishl gezel, the Torah asks it only because it's your friend's money. So by a Goy, the Torah won't ask it, because these opinions say the Goy's money is not such a problem for you. So what's the Minchas Chinuch saying? When it comes to Geneva, it's the act itself the Eibishter despises. So that's why it makes sense. By Goy is also d'oraisa. It's not about the Goy's ownership. It's the act itself God despises. And that's why also, you took it with good intentions. The good intentions won't justify the act of Goynev. So it could be d'oraisa to be Goynev, even or to pay back kefil. But the Minchas Chinuch says, Gzela, it's just about the money. So and maybe a Goy's ownership doesn't qualify to make it biblical theft. For the same reason, he's saying that, so if you take it in order to pay back, I'm not really holding on to your money. So the Gzela doesn't really apply there. That's why by Gzela it wouldn't be an issue. It's a logic. Avol Geneva, it's about the midah gerua, so by Goy it's asur as well. Fine. So the Minchas Chinuch is providing a svara for Rabbi Chanan Wasserman and the Pnei Shlomo. So according to this is our answer number 3. That taking a field is Gzela. By Gzela, the law does not apply of taking it to give it back. For sure not to give back more. Even Stam to give it back wouldn't apply. Because there's no real hefsed moment, you're not causing a loss. By Geneva, it's the act itself. It happens to be the Rebbe actually uses this svar in a beautiful sikh in Chelik Lamed Daled Ekev. about how Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchos in Parshas Kisisa. They're not his. The luchos belong to the Jews. How did he break it? How did he massacre? So the Rebbe says that it's true according to the Shulchan Aruch. Both the Shulchan Aruch holds Geneva and Gzeila is also even to pay back more. It was only the Rambam that we wanted to say this difference. But the Rebbe says even if Geneva and Gzeila you can't do to pay back more, mazik you could. Mazik you could. And the Rebbe learns that by mazik, by Geneva and Gzeila, the Rebbe learns there by both of them is the abhorrent act of taking. The Minchas Chinuch was being machalach between Geneva and Gzeila. The Rebbe learns, no, let's put them both together. They're both a despicable act of taking somebody's money. So there's no justification for that, even if you want to pay back more. But by damaging, if you damage someone's property, damaging, it's not about the act, it's causing your friend a loss. So if you're going to damage him and only pay back that amount, you didn't do him any favors, it's still a problem. But if you're damaging in order to pay back more, it's mutter by mazik. The Rebbe learns by mazik, and the Rebbe has a few rayas. By mazik could be mutter. So it could be Moshe Rabbeinu was destroying the luchos in order to help us in many, many ways. That the benefit we got was more than the loss. The Rebbe falls off of that ultimately, but upon him, the Minchas Chinuch says it between Geneva and Gzeil itself. The last answer I want to say very quickly is when it comes to karka, not only is Gzeila versus Geneva, but you're not really being goizel at all. You're not really possessing the land. When it comes to metalton, you can possess an item. When it comes to land, you go into someone's field, the land really possesses you. In fact, there's a halacha. If you take my watch, neither of us can consecrate it, be makdish it. Rabbi Yochanan says, I can't because even though it's mine, it's not in my reshus. You have taken it into your possession. As a thief, it's in your possession. If you're holding on to it for me, you're my shomer, then it's still in my possession. But if you've taken it from me, I can't be makdish it because although it's mine, it's in your domain, and you can't be makdish it because although it's in your domain, it's mine. But the Gemara says in Bab Metzia Daf Sam, when it comes to land, if you come and steal my land, as long as I could go to court and reclaim it from you, I have evidence. So even though I didn't do that, I can be makdish it. It's considered in my domain. The land's in my domain. In fact, in the end of Baba Kama, there's a famous Mishnah. You take my land, right? You're living in my land. And then a river comes, there's a storm, a hurricane, destroys the house. You don't pay me a cent. You tell me, here's the house. The house was yours. It is yours. It was always yours. Here's it is. Rabbi Lozer says, no. Rabbi Lozer says, I can charge you for the house. Rabbi Lozer believes that you can steal land. Just like if you steal my watch, the moment you take it, you took it in order to steal it, you have an acquisition. It's called a kinyan geneva. You become chayiv for any accident that happens to it until you return it. If a lightning bolt comes and strikes the watch, you're chayiv to pay me for the watch. It's a lightning bolt. We're not pinning you for the lightning bolt. We're pinning you for the fact that the moment you took that watch, you became chayiv to return it. It's an acquisition that works against you for the watch. Rabbi Lozer says by karka the same thing. When you go into land, you have an acquisition of theft. Whatever happens to the land, you're responsible. The chachamim argue. Halacha chachamim say no. When it comes to land, it doesn't become in the reshus of the thief.
Well, what's the gather of the acquisition?
By metaltalin?
No, by land.
So when it comes to land, when it comes to land, you can't really. You're called the Gazlan. So here's the thing. In number 17, there's a letter of the Rosh, a beautiful letter of the Rosh. The Rosh says, if you took possession of my land and a river was shaitiv, it flooded the land, or you stole my servants, etc., and something natural happened to them, they grew old, you can just say, here, harei shel chalafanecha. You don't have to, it's not your responsibility. Because it's always in the possession of the owner. Hilkoch, therefore, says the Rosh, if you stole a field, but you didn't use it, or you didn't plow it, you didn't plant it, or you stole a house, but you never used it. What does that mean? I don't know, you locked the door of the house so the owners can't come in. You stole the house but didn't use it. You're not over Baal Pigzel, says the Rosh. Because it's in the domain of the owners. You haven't done anything. You stopped, you prevented the owners from using it, So you cause them a damage. That's just groma b'nezakin. That's mazik. You cause the damage. You don't have to pay because you're only a groma, but there's no theft. But if you eat the fruits of the field, then you're over Baal Tigzol. Because those are my fruits. Or if you use the house and you didn't pay me, you're over for Baal Tigzol. You use it. The Rosh says if you intrude, according to the Rosh, trespassing onto property or to land, you're not over Gzela. That's a groma b'nezakin. You're just being goyim me a nezek that I couldn't make money.
It's a big loss.
It is a big loss. So your gram is still asur deraisa, and your chayiv b'din shamayim.
To get hana from it, basically. Steal the pages or sleep in the house.
And while you're doing it, I can come and I can try and stop you, and if you don't, I can hit you, and we'll have a brawl. And if I kill you, I kill you. You know, there's dinim about that too. What you can do to stop somebody who's damaging you. That's right. If you start a brawl, the guy fights back, you fight him back. He hits you, and you end up whatever. If that's how it results. So, what do you see from the Rosh? Trespassing, you're not over lo sigzal. But when you use the karka, that's when you become a gazlan. You're over lo sigzal. You become a gazlan if you use the karka. But although you become a gazlan, right? You don't acquire it at all. If the thing falls down, not to your fault, you just tell the owner. If an earthquake destroys the house, you tell the owner, here it is. By a watch was struck by a lightning bolt, you would have to pay back because you have a kinyan on it. Not here. Here, you're just in the house. It's always in the possession of the owner. So, in other words, when it comes to karka, it's not so simple to become a gazlan. How do you define a gazlan of karka? It's not enough to trespass. No, the Rosh says clearly you're not trespassing. If you go there in the field but you don't use it, even if you lock the field and you threw the owner out, you're still not a gazlan. You're a mazik. You're not over lo sigzal till you use it. It's not so easy to become a gazlan of karka. So what is the characteristic of the gazlan? I think the vort is, if you're there and you use it in spite of the owner. Like he says that you sleep there and don't pay the owner money. You're using it and instead of the owner using it. Like pushing the owner out of his own domain. Even the Rambam writes in number 19, you know how you steal land? By asogas gvul. If you push the border of your land into your neighbor's land, he says even the width of a finger. If you did it deliberately, and if you did it openly, you're a gazlan. If it was late at night and quietly, you're a ganav. If you did an Eretz Yisrael, you're over on Baal Tasik Gvul Re'echa. But the Rambam says, how do you become a gazlan for karka? You have to remove the ownership of the owner from that piece of land.
It has to be a neighbor or something.
Or in number 18 is the Rambam in Hilchot Gzeil. He says, what's a gazlan? You take somebody's money by force, you grab metaltlin from his hand, or you went into his reshus and you took kalim. Look at the last line of 18. Or you went into his field and you ate the fruits. The Rambam seems to agree to the Rosh that if you go into his field stamazoi, you're not over lo sigzal. I saw some people say they think the Rambam's cholik on the Rosh. I don't think it's true. The Rambam says very clearly, if you go into the field and you ate the fruits, if you stam go in the field, you're not over. In number 19, he says you're over gzeil if you push it, encroach into his field and claim ownership over it. What I want to suggest, and I'm not the first one, others have said this, and l'chayr, it's very logical. When it comes to karka, you only become a gazlan if your presence in the field, it's not just you're using it to the exclusion of the owner. You're shoving out the owner's ownership, like the Rambam says, by asogas gvul. You're encroaching on his territory as if this is your backyard. You're using it for yourself to the exclusion of the owner. But if the reason that you're there is to help the owner, there's no personal gain. when you go into the field like Iyov to be mashpich, to improve the field, you're b'chlal not a gazlan. That's this fourth final answer. The fourth answer is, yeah, it could be that stealing to pay back is all asa d'oraisa, and maybe we won't be mechalek by gneving. Salum like the Beis Yosef and the Tur, that gnev and zela are the same. Here, when it comes to karka, you b'chal don't become a gazlan unless you have certain things in mind. Unless you eat the fruits for yourself, or you're encroaching on it, you're pushing the border of your backyard. Or like the Rosh says, you're sleeping in the house and you're not planning to pay. You're using it in spite and exclusion of the owner. That's when you become a gazlan on the karka. But if you're there to help the owner, right? So in no way are you encroaching, you're not disturbing, you're not threatening the ownership of the owner. You don't become a gazlan b'chal. That's the fourth answer. Okay, we will end with this.